Somewhere, right now, on a computer near you, something is waiting. It isn't a virus. It doesn't look like malware. It has no strange file name, no flashing warning, no reason to raise suspicion. It looks exactly like what it's supposed to look like: routine, harmless, official. And that's the part that should terrify you. Because somewhere, in the last 24 hours, thousands of organizations opened their front door and personally invited an enemy inside, willingly, knowingly. They even clicked the button themselves. They didn't do it because they were careless. They did it because they were told to. It's what every security expert on Earth tells you to do. Update your software. Trust your vendors. Stay current. Stay safe. So, what happens when the advice itself becomes the weapon? For over a year, one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in modern history didn't break into its targets. It was invited in by the targets themselves through a piece of software so trusted, so routine, that almost no one thought to question it. Federal agencies, Fortune 500 companies, the very organizations whose job is to protect national secrets compromised for months without a single alarm. And here's the question that should keep you up tonight. They only found out by accident. Not because a firewall caught it, not because an algorithm flagged it, not because the most advanced cyber defense systems on the planet did their job. A stranger noticed something small, something almost nobody would have caught. And when they finally pulled that thread, they didn't find an attack. They found a ghost that had been living inside American infrastructure for over a year, watching, listening, waiting, and when investigators asked the only question that mattered, how did it get in? The answer was almost impossible to believe. It got in through the one thing everyone trusted completely. To understand how this happened, forget everything you know about hackers in hoodies, typing furiously in dark basements. That's not what this was. This was something far quieter, far more patient. This was psychology, weaponized. Because the attackers understood something that most security teams didn't want to admit. Humans don't get hacked because they're stupid. They get hacked because they're busy. Every IT department in the world runs on trust shortcuts. You don't manually verify every line of code in every update from every vendor you use. Nobody does. There isn't time. There isn't budget. There isn't a version of modern life where that's even possible. So, the attackers didn't try to break trust. They borrowed it. They didn't send a suspicious email. They didn't ask anyone to click a strange link. They went further upstream to the software itself before it ever reached a human being to be suspicious of. Which means the employees who installed that update did everything right. They followed procedure. They followed policy. They followed the exact instructions their own IT departments gave them. And that's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. This wasn't a story about people making careless mistakes. This was a story about people doing exactly what they were trained to do and getting compromised anyway. But here's where it gets stranger. In hindsight, there were signs. Small ones, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them, and almost nobody was. Unusual outbound traffic, late at night, from servers that should have been silent. A handful of login attempts from accounts that hadn't been used in months. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed breach. Just slightly off. The kind of anomaly a tired analyst at the end of a long shift might reasonably decide wasn't worth chasing. And that's exactly what the attackers were counting on. Not incompetence. What began as one analyst's stubborn question didn't stay small for long. Within hours, it stopped looking like an anomaly and started looking like a crime scene. Investigators pulled the logs. Then they pulled more logs. Then they realized the logs themselves couldn't be fully trusted because whoever did this understood exactly how to move without leaving the kind of fingerprints anyone was trained to look for. Then investigators found something impossible. The intrusion didn't start where they thought it did. Tracing backward, the earliest signs of compromise stretched back months before anyone noticed anything wrong, long before the first alarm, long before the first suspicious login. Whoever was inside this network had been inside it for the better part of a year, which raised a question nobody wanted to say out loud. If it took this long to notice, what else hasn't been noticed yet? As the forensic team dug deeper, the picture didn't get clearer. It got bigger, far bigger. This wasn't one compromised network. It was a chain-one trusted system feeding into another and another, each one vouching for the next, each one unknowingly spreading the same quiet infection. But the most disturbing detail came later, when investigators asked the obvious question, who else has this? The answer arrived department by department, agency by agency, company by company. Each new confirmation didn't close the case. It opened 3 more. What happened next shouldn't have been possible. Cross-referencing the intrusion pattern, investigators realized the exact same method, the exact same quiet, patient technique had been used to reach into networks that were supposed to be among the most protected on the planet. And still, the attackers hadn't made a single mistake anyone could point to. No ransom note, no data dump, no demands, nothing to explain why. Which meant this had never been about money at all. And the moment investigators understood that this wasn't a robbery, and once investigators accepted that, they had to ask a much harder question. If nothing was stolen in the traditional sense, no money drained, no ransom paid, then what exactly was the target? The answer was almost worse than theft. They were after access, quiet, ongoing, deniable access to the internal communications of the U.S. government itself, read but not taken, watched but not disturbed. The kind of operation that isn't measured in dollars stolen, but in secrets seen. And that reframed everything. This wasn't a heist. It was surveillance patient, disciplined, and built to last as long as possible without ever being noticed. But then investigators turned their attention somewhere uncomfortable, not toward the attackers, but toward the company that had been breached in the first place. Regulators later alleged something that made the entire story darker. According to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SolarWinds had represented its security practices to customers and investors as far stronger than internal records apparently showed for years before the breach was ever discovered. Who knew the risk was real? The SEC's complaint pointed to internal warnings employees who had apparently flagged security gaps well before the intrusion was ever detected. And the timing of one detail struck investigators as impossible to ignore. Securities filings showed that several SolarWinds executives sold company stock in the weeks before the breach became public knowledge, a sequence regulators scrutinized closely, though the executives maintained the sales were unrelated and pre-scheduled. Who benefited from staying quiet just a little longer? SolarWinds has disputed key elements of the SEC's case, but the questions the case raised were never really about one company. They were about an entire industry that had spent years selling the promise of security while the actual mechanics of trust, verification, and accountability quietly eroded behind the scenes. Because if a company entrusted with the security of the U.S. government could get this wrong, eventually, the investigation reached its official conclusions. Reports were filed, statements were issued, new security requirements were written into federal policy. And to most of the world, the story ended there. But here is a fact worth sitting with. The exact method used in this operation compromising software before it ever reaches the people using it has not been eliminated. It cannot be. It's not a bug in one company's code. It's a structural feature of how modern software is built, distributed, and trusted everywhere by everyone. Security researchers have since identified similar supply chain techniques used in other unrelated incidents. Different targets, different actors, same underlying method. This is not a warning about what might happen. It's a description of what is already happening in networks most people will never hear about. For the same reason this one went undetected for over a year, because the system is built on trust, and trust, by definition, is difficult to verify. You are, right now, running software you did not write, did not inspect, and could not fully verify even if you tried. So is your bank. So is your hospital. So is the agency that holds your tax records. This isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. The real danger in this story was never a single intelligence operation or a single compromised company. It was the invisible architecture of trust that made an operation like this not just possible, but, in hindsight, almost inevitable. That architecture has not been rebuilt. It has only been patched. Somewhere, right now, another update is being written. Somewhere, right now, someone is deciding whether to verify it or simply trust it the way almost everyone always has. No one can tell you with certainty that this hasn't already happened again. No one can tell you it isn't happening tonight.